Thank you, Andrew. So over to you. Sorry for the delayed start.
That's okay. Just want to check before I do start. How long have I got in terms of this? Is it the same running time, or have we got another deadline?
We've got. If you could shorten it a little bit, that would be much appreciated. I know but if you could do it in 15 or something like that, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
No problem. So I'm just going to talk to the subject matter. I've got no slides, and I apologise in advance if the usual happens, which is my two dogs start kicking off because there's someone at the door. The normal warnings in this COVID period. So what I'm going to talk about is perhaps from a practical viewpoint, the sorts of solutions that we are needing to adapt to the current environment, and I'll come back to that in a little bit, and why it's really important that we start to use data at a very practical, transactional level within our daily lives. So I'll start with a little bit of background about myself, and to give you a bit of context about why I'm coming at the problem in the way that I am, and the genesis of some of the discussions. A little bit about the team that I work with, because it's not just me. In fact, it's very little me. There's a number of people involved. Something about designing our environment for every day, living alongside the coronavirus and inevitably other mutations and other viruses that are already coming along. Something specifically around testing, which is pretty topical, just to give you a feel for its limitations and where we're at on that. And then to finish up on which is the purpose of the talk, on screening and what that means for everyday events like turning up to the office or going along to a football match, etc. So that's the sort of basic frame. So my background, I've worked on the boundary between local public services, and that varies as to what it means in which country you're in, and the private sector, bringing in innovation to radically improve local public services and reduce their cost. It's a common feature of local government and its partners around the world the last sort of decade or so, is that we're doing, as one council chief executive described to me, we're doing more with less, and now we're doing more with nothing. So that's sort of the basic environment. And I've worked in something like 25 different countries, lived and worked with local public services around the world. And more recently, that has been in building and running a not-for-profit mutual in the UK that collaborates internationally on how you deliver significant impact to changes in services. And it's important to underline the significance of that, because as one colleague who was then the director of adult social care in Birmingham told me many years ago, if I sack everybody, including myself, and leave the money on the top step of the council, I still haven't saved enough money. So it's not about doing what we currently do better and more efficiently. That's needed to give us the financial headroom to actually totally reinvent what we do to have impact without actually needing local public service. So it's a very significant agenda. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was clear that there was a gap between what was being delivered and what was needed to carry on everyday life. And we were commissioned by the Local Government Association to look at local authority plans to how they were going to recover. And the comment I made is, well, how do you know we're going to recover? Do we not need to adapt? Isn't that the right question? Having, as you used to win, as we all do over a pint to friends, they said, well, you work in that sphere, why don't you do something about it? So at the time, obviously, we were facing a significant problem, a specific one, in access to PPE, and particularly in care homes. And so having worked overseas, I got a few friends together, and we actually ended up with a large-scale solution to deliver the whole UK requirement for PPE. We got access to every manufacturing base, state and private, in China. We got a letter of credit for £3 billion from the Chinese government, and we were ready to rock and roll. Unfortunately, the government filter was all covered and they didn't need any support, but lots of governments in Europe did, and we provided support to, amongst others, Poland. In fact, I recall we had a a wire transfer of $24 million into one of my colleagues' bank accounts with pretty much an email that said, "Go buy PPE, please." And not only did we do that, we actually helped them build manufacturing in Poland so that for the second wave, they were independent and didn't need to go out externally. In fact, they became a net exporter of PPE by the second wave. So in doing that, we got into contact with a number of people around the world, a network of scientists and epidemiologists that were working on the kind of solution. And that was the penny drop moment for me, where both the epidemiologist in New Zealand, where you thought they'd done pretty well, but also the guy in Hunan that was, he had 8 new cases, so he commissioned 10 million more tests that week, which, just my jaw hit the table when he said that. They both said, but we're living with this permanently. Even if we get a vaccine, we're living with this permanently. So we're going through everything from how do we design buildings to be used by groups of people that might be transmitting notifiable diseases to each other. And that's when I thought, well, it's more than just this quick fix of access to PPE. We need to redesign at a detailed level every environment that we live and work in to live alongside this virus and others to come. And so we started in the good local government tradition of saying, okay, let's look around the world. The solutions will be out there, just not in one place. So what are the solutions that we need to bring together so that we can then analyze the environment and then design those in so that you can actually go about your life, enjoying your life, not just surviving, scuttling from one place to the other, hoping you're not going to get infected. And in doing that, we brought together a pretty good team. So we got Professor Tara Moore, who's a professor of personalized medicine at Ulster University, who was brought out to China to help at the early stages with the response there in terms of testing, and runs a number of programs internationally. And you and I probably collect I don't know, scale cards or whatever as a kid. She collects COVID positive blood and COVID positive saliva, and most people around the world developing their testing regimes send them to Tara just to check that the testing regime's accuracy. We've got John Green, who was until recently a chief executive of an NHS trust and was the guy behind saying, okay, we need more bed capacity. Let's design and build what became the Nightingale hospitals and got those up and running in a 10-day period. We've got Brad Collier, who has been importing and exporting new technologies around the world for about 30, 40 years now. And of course, not last but not least, Tim, is yourself in terms of the application of data and data science to kind of what we're doing. What are we trying to achieve? It's actually relatively simple. We're only trying to achieve 2 things, really. We're trying to stop surface-to-human transmission, and we're trying to stop human-to-human transmission. So absolutely simple, really. And actually, when you start with that, you go onto the government website, there are oodles. You can spend hours trawling through the guidance for different industry sectors. Every industry sector's got its own guidance from Public Health England. And most people are trying to be compliant with that guidance. Unfortunately, if you follow the evidence, compliance doesn't give you safety. So everyone will be familiar with the fact that if you have a COVID positive test, you'll self-isolate for 10 days. Anybody in your household or people you've come into contact with, assuming they actually manage to trace you, will be are self-isolating for 14 days. Unfortunately, the average infection time is 20 days, and it's actually pretty common to be between 4 and 6 weeks. So actually, even after your self-isolation period, you're probably going out and infecting people. The basic sort of principles upon which we're working aren't necessarily correct. Then if you take that down to the micro level, the advice is to just clean more frequently and clean more thoroughly. And in reality, that still leaves infection gaps. So from the moment you've finished cleaning to the moment you clean again, that surface can be recolonized and can lead to infection between people. So what we've done is effectively take individual sectors, so the police, for example, and we have followed them. We've looked at the day in the life of a police person, and literally second by second, and not just what they do, but how they do it. And what you come up with there, if you look at the day in the life of a policeman, you see about 40 different types of event where transmission occurs. And the biggest one actually is the fact that police cells have toilets in them. Those toilets don't have lids, and every time it's flushed, if someone's infected, it creates a plume of coronavirus. And a number of police stations have been closed down because they've had dozens of infections in one shift. They haven't known until the second shift, so everyone's sent home to self-isolate. And they actually are bordering on, there's a sort of threshold at which the police become unviable. In some areas, they've become effectively unviable from the number of people going home self-isolating. So what we did was we took the NHS stratification of risk. There's a sort of red, amber, green areas and the way in which they classify those. We've modified it from the basis of the kind of real knowledge about how the virus spreads and how long people are infectious. And then what we started to do is map solutions around the world. So, for example, we will deep clean and we'll use some chlorine-based solution or an equivalent. Actually, you can take a solution which, when you have washed the surface, leaves a nano layer of silicon dioxide on the surface. It has antipathogen in it. It will last for 10 days. And anybody that touches that surface within 10 days, it will kill the COVID. It's actually been in regular use in a number of countries for about 10 years, just never made it to the UK. Similarly, you can get a plant-based antipathogen that you can put on your hands. It'll last for about 2 hours. It's commonly used in Germany in football matches. The crowd go in, they'll coat their hands, and they'll keep those hands protected for that 2-hour period. And there are other solutions that have come along since. So using cold plasma technology, you can not only clean the air first pass in a building, you can charge the air such that it will kill off COVID virus as you breathe out. So you breathe out into the air itself will actually neutralize the coronavirus. And so you take those examples and you start to map them onto different environments, and you start to get solutions which will reduce the risk. Don't completely remove it, but they will reduce the risk. And then finally, you start to say, well, okay, actually the best way I can reduce the risk is to remove people from the environment that are super spreaders. And people will be familiar with the government testing program being on the news quite a lot, and they use a form of testing called PCR testing. And that test effectively uses a lab-based environment to grow the virus to a point it can be detected. And in fact, actually, it's useful information to know how much you need to grow the virus to detect it, because actually that gives you an idea about the viral load on average in the population. And that's backed up by monitoring of dirty grey water coming from houses to see what coronavirus levels there are in that as well. And in terms of that, PCR was considered the gold standard. And most of the people running the tests or testing methods will give you how my method is accurate to whatever percent, both in terms of false positives and negatives. And PCR is the high 90s, but it's high 90s for the first infection period, around 10 to up to 15 days. After that, it falls off a cliff. So if you're in latter stages of infection, which could be some weeks, you get a false negative. But then if you throw antibody tests into the mix, they'll give you accuracy in terms of your antibody reaction to coronavirus, but they won't pick up at the early stages. And in fact, actually, some people's antibodies don't kick in at all. So you effectively need, strictly speaking, a double test. And those tests take time. They also take serious resources. But actually now we're starting to see some change. So looking for the coronavirus spike protein through an antigen test, as of about next week, we hope, you'll be able to get effectively an over-the-counter test, which you can self-administer using saliva, which will be accurate enough to remove highly infected super spreaders out of the environment. So you start to think about, actually, can we manage the risk down in an environment like a football match, etc.? Can we get back to some new normality? But those tests take time. You're talking about 20 to, which is speedy compared to PCR testing. 20 to 30 minutes for an antigen test. 10 to 15 minutes for an antibody test. And therefore, you've got to think about, are there other ways in which I can de-risk the environment? First of all, you might want to target testing and do higher quality testing there. But actually, ultimately, what you'd like to do is say, if there's someone that's a likely risk, I don't really want them turning up. Thank you very much. And that's where you start to say, well, okay, how can I find that out? And you can start to think about where people have come from, of course. And so what we've done in looking at this is, in partnering with yourself, Tim, and with Lumilinks, is to say, let's bring together a broad range of data. And let's see, what the COVID weather is, if we want to relate it to previous presentations today. So what does COVID look like in small areas across the country? And if I'm an employer, I can look at the postcode of my staff, and I can start to see where they live and what their current risk is. But actually, to predict. So one of the people we're a supplier to is Father Christmas. So Father Christmas has asked us to protect him and his elves this year. And he's going to be opening up late. So UK Lapland is going to be opening up either after this current predicted lockdown end or in the new year. But they'll be kind of doing it come what may. And rather than getting your present from Father Christmas, you'll have an opportunity to thank him for the presents you've already received. But there'll be 150,000 people coming to that event. And that's, whilst it's spread over a period of time, that's still thousands of people per day. And what they want to do is be the most friendly environment possible. So they don't want you to turn up on the day and be told, terribly sorry, you've come from the wrong place, go home. So the idea is then that you can start to predict in a positive and a negative way what your risk level is going to be in the following week. And then they'll say, okay, it looks like actually you're going to be an area that we probably aren't going to be accepting people from next week. So we'll buy your ticket back if you would like that to be the case. If you want to take the risk, that's up to you, but we'll buy your tickets back. And actually, they've got a queue of people waiting to buy them, so it's not a problem from a commercial perspective. And then, obviously, from a positive perspective, it could be, okay, you might feel that you're locked down, but actually, we think you're going to be okay next week. In which case, come along, come down, and join in the fun. And of course, that applies to offices as well. There's a number of businesses that we're working with who the staff themselves want to come back into the office, but actually, what we don't want to do is contribute to spreading. So again, removing people that are at higher risk from the environment allows you to do that data analytics and actually start to say, okay, you should be coming into the office. So that puts us in a position whereby we can start to think more broadly. And the next step for us is we're working with whole areas. So the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole area is one. The Eastbourne area is another, where they're planning for next year to open up. And that means that in Eastbourne's case, they've got the international tennis tournament as part of that. In Bournemouth, they've got the international air show. And they want to create a kind of a normal as possible environment. So in Bournemouth, we've got the university, the conference centre, the football team, and we're also planning the first fully open wedding. So the unrestricted, at the moment you're restricted to 15 people, including the happy couple. This will be unrestricted and back to a normal event. So a real signal that life is going back to normal, but not on the assumption that coronavirus has gone away. But the idea is that we can actually hold a safe event in those circumstances. And of course, that analysis of where people are coming from is a core part of that. So that's my, sorry, it's not 15, 17 minutes worth, which hopefully brings you a little bit back on track. You're muted, Tim.
Yes, it won't be the last time I hear that phrase. As it happens, whilst you've been talking, we've had the unfortunate message that our next speaker, the National Statistician, can't make it. That something's wrong with his technology.
Typical.
Which, I guess, having learned some of the benefits of virtual events, I'm now learning one of those challenges of the event. So if there is anything else you want to say, you have the floor if you like. But so thank you very much sticking to, and I guess one of the things as a question I would like to, given it being about the analysis, is where do you think analysis, and how do you find analysis, because we're in a new environment, and how we scale up and contribute with analysis in these really fastly changing environments? What would you how would you answer that question?
Well, I think one of the main problems, as I'm sure you'll all be aware, is access to good quality data. And certainly the local government experience has been that we've not been getting access to raw data quick enough. I mean, things have improved a lot more, but there's still more out there. I certainly haven't seen, for example, the analysis of the dirty water data, which would be really interesting to see from a spatial point of view, because it doesn't just give you, I mean, it's a really good indicator of viral load. And then actually, if you took some of the raw PCR data that's out there, again, there's a thing called the cycle threshold. So, it's one cell of virus, one cycle grows it to 2, then to 4, then to 8, etc. So the number of cycles that on average you're going through is a very good indicator of viral load. So I know, because we oversee testing in a variety of runs, that the viral load appears to be going up, which it shouldn't be in the second wave. So there's something wrong somewhere, and I think so. For me, I think access to all of these data sources, and actually it would be great to get some of the students that are on earlier to sort of get some of those data and play around with them, because I think we'd learn a lot from that. So I think lack of transparency actually has been our biggest challenge so far. And I'm not quite sure what the solution to that one is. I think there's a central government issue there, which would be interesting to ask them about. But if we could get access to those data, then I think we could have far more informed decision making, because even after we go national, regional lockdown, we'll have very local lockdowns. Ultimately, we'll get back to a service like it is with an ordinary local authority, where you get an outbreak of food poisoning at a restaurant. It's going to get down to that level. And there's a very good article, The Hammer and the Dance, which talks about the standard response to a pandemic. And that dance is going to get smaller and smaller in its geography, and we're going to have to get more and more focused. So the analytics is not going to go away. It's going to get more and more important in that regard, and it really should be a standard tool in the day in the life of an environmental health officer. So that would be my wish for a solution. That the challenge is the data access, I think.
I think you've just pointed out sometimes data, like you talked about the viral load, can be a bit like the canary in the coal mine. Sometimes there are little nuggets of data that actually indicate something else that's far bigger than what you can actually measure. And the other one was actually, you alluded to the students. If they could have embraced the whole citizen science type movement, and I know an event that's going on alongside us is the Data Initiatives conference is happening today, and they would be very warm to that. But my other thought, given you said about your work in a number of other countries, and you mentioned Poland in particular, I know that was with PEPE. Have you seen any examples of analysis that's been able to be done elsewhere? I noticed in New Zealand, for example, or even Wuhan, that the way they responded very differently in terms of testing capacity and things, didn't they, as well? But any particular examples of analysis abroad?
There are a number of countries where, in terms of the tracing, there's interesting the GPS data presentation earlier, but in terms of the tracing of individuals' journeys, actually better notify people saying, actually, you were on the same carriage on a train as the person that's been reported infected today. So that there are issues about privacy in that, which we would have as a not as a barrier, but as something to be managed. But in a number of countries, they have had that level of analytics from the get-go, and I think their use of geospatial data is generally more prolific in the public sector than ours is, I would say. I think we had a very good start as a country in terms of use of that in local government, but I think one of the things that's been hammered in austerity actually is the amount of resource that's been put into that field.
And which countries are good at that? And where are you getting political?
Yes, well, Singapore, South Korea, a number. Well, there's a lot I could list. But those are the two. There's the two that certainly we've looked at in particular. And actually, they did extend the hand of friendship and say they would help us. But again, unfortunately, they were turned down.
Really? So do you think that's? And I'm hogging the questions now. If anybody else has got any questions, please throw them out, and I'm sure some of the other panelists would take them. But I'm intrigued now to ask. I know Europe has been particularly, and Northern America have been particularly badly affected by this virus, and had second waves. And nothing like that has happened in Asia where it started, is it? And do you think that is connected to the things like you said about South Korea?
I think it's partly connected because they've had more viruses. So, for us, this is probably the first significant virus since 1918, and we've had one in the 50s. But the reality is that the last SARS virus, H1N1, all those have been so the response to that, plus as well, I think some of the more societal norms in terms of wearing masks, etc., is helpful. Interestingly, we did have a trial run for a pandemic a year before the event actually happened. We failed miserably at the response, and we just filed a report on a shelf and didn't do anything about it. So there were lessons to learn that we didn't learn, that's not good enough. As a sector. I mean, I know again, I saw the director of adult social care from the Isle of Wight, who had been participating, saying we should have taken those lessons on board. And now I think perhaps, hopefully, at least governments will realise, including ours, that that's an essential part of our risk management for the future.
Yeah, because pandemics have sat on the top of risk registers for a long time, but people have got. I think I heard it elsewhere said that people got complacent because they hadn't had SARS and H1N1, if you like, and
the assumption was, we're a modern country with a good national health service and good public health, and we therefore will be fine, and that's obviously shown not to be true.
So Stevie Cook has put a very interesting question. I've been thinking about it myself a little bit, and he's wondering at the moment how much data privacy concerns and GDPR impact on our ability to actually prosecute, if you like, strategies at the moment for delivering. It might be targeted tests, for example, or it might be other ways of the track and trace, if you like, was hijacked, if you like. That might not be the right choice of words, but has certainly made it harder to deliver a track and trace type solution because of these GDPR and data privacy things. Have you got any thoughts on that yourself?
Yeah, I do. My background, my doctorate is in rights in data and trust. So I wanted to. I mean, I've worked in a number of different countries where they've managed to balance the privacy concerns and access to data. It's not. We have a particular issue here. I think there was an issue of trust in government on handing over data to government. I think the trust levels in local authorities actually are quite high. If you look at track and trace, most of the figures that are reported about people have been traced by councils. So council trace rates are more than 95%. Central government trace rates are 40% downwards. So I think it is possible to match, they balance those two, but people have to have a fundamental trust in the people holding and managing the data. And I think there is a debate required for the future, which is how do we provide access to data which allows us to create the statistics and the knowledge that we need without actually someone feeling like they're exposing their life history to someone to use for whatever purpose they like. And if we can balance that, which I believe we can, then we should be in a better position for next time round.
I know that there was an interesting discussion in the press about an individual who'd been ruled out because of a credit score. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I missed that.
So a woman who had gone for actually, I think, for a part of the track and trace, but was excluded because of the lack of information in her credit score, because apparently one of the credit reference agencies, is behind one of the identity measures, and they were unable to identify themselves in a form that would be appropriate for financial tracking. But which I don't know. You shake your head, and I agree. We get a bit sort of tied up with these things at the moment, and it's certainly limiting our response.
Yeah, at a practical level, actually, even if you don't know someone's identity, if you know that they're infected and they're in a particular place, that's what you need for backtracing anyway. So sometimes we assume we need to know more than we actually do. Obviously, you want to be able to contact the person and help them, and you want to be a forward trace from them. But actually, most of the infection spotted has been by backtracing, where you basically say, okay, 10 people that were infected were all in this location. Therefore, let's go to that location and find out who else was there. And that's been the most successful route to tracing people.
And that is what local public health people are trained to do in many ways, isn't it? That's their
exactly.
natural response.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
You raise an interesting. I go back to my start where I talked about, if you like, trying to create models which can assess causal inference. I would love to have been able to trial the fact that if you had a locally referenced site where people uploaded their data to their local council rather than to a national environment, whether that would have improved uptake. I wonder if some of the behaviouralists on the SAGE committee have considered that as one of their mitigation strategies. An really interesting thought. But
there's a lot of people who don't trust the government to handle their data. They feel like the data might be used, transferred to the states or whatever else. There's not a high trust level. Whereas I think at the council, they don't tend to have that issue. And actually, to be honest, anonymized, it's not beyond our wit to create something that allows people, and that was the basis of a lot of the apps that have been used around the world, is to someone to be able to anonymously say, I was infected and this is where I was, so we can handle the anonymity quite well, actually, and put control in the hands of the individual. And if they feel like they're controlling their data, I think then we've got more chance of having access to that.
Well, I was going to. Paul Longears popped up, and I noticed in the presentation you briefly alluded to the way the names data has been used to handle some of the COVID analysis. I wonder if you can give us a little bit more background to that, Paul, because I'm fascinated by that, the way you understand ethnicity at a much more granular and current level than
Okay. Yes, thanks, Tim. I think one of the important points about those maps, of course, is they're talking about small area aggregations, and I think these are issues to which there are known analytical solutions. There is a level of granularity at which you can all but guarantee. You can never completely guarantee, but you can effectively manage risk. Manage risk, and I think that's that's relevant to the issues of trust that have just been referred to. One of our experiences, I have to say, during COVID was not particularly helpful, and that is in the actual ethnicity estimator that we put together with ONS. Our ethical review committee said that the view was it was unethical to use the tool to produce individual level predictions. And when the issue of COVID and death certificates not stating ethnicity, which I believe has since been addressed, was raised, we asked the ONS to relax that assumption. And they thought about it for not a little while. And the answer came back basically no. And so basically, if you want individual level predictions, commercial solutions are available, but not perhaps the best one. which has been driven on official government data. I think that the second point I just wanted to make, sort of again returning to COVID, and also the first talk this afternoon, and the issue of severe but low probability events. I think there is some feedback in terms of the student presentations that we've seen this afternoon. I go back to the point about any organisation, not just a local authority or government, and any data analysis team, really engaging in horizon scanning. And that's the sort of thing that engaging students and sort of sponsoring ad hoc projects can really open up. I very often think, I don't know if anyone is of a sort of similar generation of schooling to me who's sort of listening, but when in classic, the history of the Industrial Revolution, when they explain data mining, the concept of mining. Mining is introduced to school kids through the concept of adit mining. Basically, you have geologically a structure sticking out of a hill. You tunnel along the seam. When the seam's exhausted, that's the end of the mine. And I think that actually is quite an important analogy when we come to think of data mining, because too many companies mine their own seam of data, but they're not really aware of the landscape in which that seam is located. And when we come to planning for crisis, low probability emergencies, which nevertheless can prove to be catastrophic, as we've seen, should they come to pass, you can't do too much horizon scanning. And I think that does boil down to the discussion of analytics teams that we heard about in the first presentations, really, that you do need to move beyond tunnel vision of the organisation, the next quarter's results. And we heard that, I think, in the first presentation. But those ideas scale up from individual organisations through to government. And so get your projects ready for next year's Masters dissertation. Get horizon scanning. That's my view.
I think it's very true that actually it's very easy in a commercial context to become very internal in your perspective, and some things become very obvious if only you look at the data outside your organisation in terms of a benchmark and see things move. And I guess that's particularly important when things are changing so rapidly at the moment, because you can think that it's an internal thing that's causing that change when actually it's just you responding to the context that's around you, sort of thing. And I'm conscious I don't want to just keep talking just to fill the space that we were due to have the national statistician presented to us, and we better not share his presentation because it had some very fascinating insights in it. But maybe we can encourage him to come back to a subsequent event later on. But what I was going to introduce is a question I was going to ask them, because one of the really interesting things I have is this discussion about excess deaths and quite how we understand a death. I just as a little bit of background, you may not realise that it's 400 years this year since a guy called John Graunt was born, who was probably the first person to analyse deaths. He looked at bills of morbidity back in the 16th century and was able to very quickly begin to estimate some life tables and to really help insurance, and also talk to a government who was trying to raise money by giving annuities to everybody at the same price, whatever age they were, which was at that point they thought was fair. But with not much hindsight, it seems to be a really bizarre. So you get the same money for life if you were 21 as if you were 56, when the average lifespan was sort of, I think it was around 40 at the time. So you don't need to be much of a mathematician to realize that it would be a really, really good deal at 21. But anyway, I digress. So we get back to excess deaths. And the thing that really intrigues me is that actually excess deaths are a really great thing for us analyzing within one country, for example. I've looked at it myself, as Paul knows. I download once a week from the same source that ONS gets it, lists of dead people, and analyze them for a variety of different things. And I remember it was one of the most shocking things that has occurred to me in my analytical life was this the second week of April. So as you all know, the lockdown had just come in. Normally the file is around 10 megabytes, and that week it went up to 15 megabytes. And it was one of those, and the week after it was 17 megabytes, and the week after that it was 20. So that, and I can remember looking at it, particularly the first time, suddenly realizing that actually for all the media and stuff, things were really happening, and my increased file of 50% was actually aligned to 50% more people dying in that week than normal. But anyway, so excess deaths within a country make a lot of sense, but I'm intrigued by this comparison of excess deaths. And it's partly because I know, for example, we have very few deaths globally compared from traffic deaths. And so when we have a lockdown, there's not much lost. But actually, if you look at excess deaths in India, actually, when they went through a lockdown, excess deaths dropped. It was negative, because actually COVID, for whatever it was generating less additional deaths than the deaths that were removed because traffic stopped. And so even in that context, you've got that fascinating problem of understanding quite how sensitive the excess deaths are to not only the thing you're trying to measure, i.e. the COVID issue, but also the things you're removing. So other things within your society that are linked to a lockdown, not the one that you're trying to assess, which makes cross-referencing excess deaths between different countries not as straightforward as it is. And I'm not one to sort of let off our current government from an awful position in terms of that metric, and I'm certainly not going to try and do it. But it's not as straightforward a comparison as people might think. And I was interested to see how that was handled within ONS's data, because they certainly did produce a report a while ago about the comparison of different excess deaths from different countries. I don't know if anybody else has had any thoughts about that and those metrics. Everybody else is on. I'm forgetting. Everybody else is on mute, aren't they? So they can't. So with that,